Hi everyone. I wanted to take a look at distinguishing the difference between categorical and quantitative variables, as well as the graphs that are typically associated with each one, namely pie charts, bar graphs, and histograms. Especially the histogram and bar graph, they can be really very similar and sometimes confusing. People will mix them up. I will often say the wrong one. It's something that I'm working on. So just a quick review. Here is a collection of data that I collected about how tall people are, how many cups of coffee they drink, how many members there are in their family, what their favorite color is, etc. Just a reminder that when I look at a spreadsheet, this represents one individual. An individual is whatever you're collecting data on. In this case, it happens to be on an actual individual, but you could be collecting data about how much food a dog eats. The dog would be the individual. How many miles per gallon a car gets. The car would be the individual. And then the variable are the things that change from individual to individual. You'll notice how tall are you? It changes. How many cups varies from individual to individual. So looking at one individual here, I see how tall are you. That's a quantitative variable. It's an actual measurement, a numerical measurement of something. How many cups of coffee you drink, quantitative. How many members are there in your family, that's quantitative. When you get to something like what is your favorite color, it should be easy to see that this is a categorical variable. And because of that, there's going to be a different way for us to model these two things or represent them with graphs. So I've taken this data, I've taken the first 10 individuals here, and here is an example of the 10 individuals. So that's what's going on over here. So I've taken this data, and here are the 10 individuals. So I'm going to call these, this really is, I'll just call it individuals. So here's our individuals, and here's the color that they like. To represent this data, there's a couple ways when you start looking at this. When we are working with categorical variables, and you should notice the word category in here. When we're working with categorical variables, we're going to put the actual variable down here on the x-axis. So I am going to put yellow and blue and green, because those are the first ones that I see. All right, and if you think about it, that makes a lot more sense than putting the people down here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, for example. Because my question would be, how do I graph the fact that person number 1 liked yellow? I don't know how I graph it. What does that represent? So with categorical variables, what I'm doing is I'm putting the category here, and then I'm basically just looking through and saying, well, there are 2 people that like yellow. So this must be 2. Blue. 3 people like blue. So here is the example of a bar graph. And coral, a surprising 1. So there is our bar graph. And so you're going to notice in a categorical variables, here's our categories, and here's the count. How many are in that category? So keep that in mind, because the next one I'm going to show you is a quantitative variable. Now there is a way to take this quantitative variable and draw a graph that may or may not be useful. One way to do this, kind of just a bar graph with the quantitative, would be to actually throw all of the people on here. Okay, and so number 1 is 67 inches, and number 2 is 75 inches, and number 3 is 63 inches. We're basically just representing each person with a bar that displays how many inches. Now again, that's not typically the most helpful way for us to do this. So we use what's called a histogram. The big difference with a histogram, remember, is that the histogram is going to be separated into some bins. And in this case, I am just going to, when I glance at this data, I'm looking at the smallest number is 51, and the largest number here is 75. So I'm going to do bins of 5. So I'm going to say here is 50, here is 55, 60, 70, 75, and just to be safe, I'll put an 80. All right. Now, one of the things that we really have to make sure we're clear on is that how are these bins separated? I am going to say it's 50, greater than 50, up to or equal 55. So, for example, I'm just going to put an X here so that you see it. 50 is less than X is less than or equal to 55. What that means is 50.1 would go in this bin, but the number 50 would actually go in the one over. And I'll show you what I mean as we go through here. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to represent the counts of people that are between 50 and 55. So here is right away we get the first example. So I have 2 people because I am going to include the number 55 in this bin. All right, which means that's why I'm putting it there, which means I'm really counting anything bigger. If there was a 55.1, it would go in the bin next to it. So that's how I'm defining this, and that's always important to know how this is really being defined. Where does 55 go? Does it go in this bin or does it go in the bin next to it? So now I'm just looking at this and saying, okay, between 55 and 60, so I've already got that one done. I don't have any between 55 and 60. I still have to have that bin in my histogram. It's between 60 and it should be 65. Screw up how to count on the very first one. So between 60 and 65, I've got 1. Between 65 and 70, 1, 2, 3, 4. Between 70 and 75. Actually, remember, I said 55 was included in this bin, so 70 is actually included in this bin. This one is actually 5 because the number 70 goes in there. All right, so bigger than 70 and less than 75, I have 72 and 75 would go in there. Again, because I'm including 75 in this one. So that would be basically the steps for building that histogram. Really helps if you organize these things in order first, which is why it's helpful to use a spreadsheet, organize these in order, and it helps you to count them and see. So really, just to be clear, this is bigger than 50, less than or equal to 55. So bigger than 55, but less than or equal to 60. So bigger than 60, bigger than 70 would be in the 65, bigger than 70 in this one. But again, that's really the big difference. So you'll notice with the quantitative variables, one of the key things you'll recognize being able to tell the difference is that instead of having categories on the bottom, you're going to have bins. Bins that represent the actual values that you had over here, like the heights. And then it's simply, again, just like we had in the other one, over here we still have the count that's going into those bins. So this one we had categories on the bottom in this bar graph. This one we actually had bins going in there, and then both of them had the count going up. So there's a number of ways to represent the data, but that's the difference between the histogram, where you're counting the number of times something appears in there, and the category, where you're counting the number in each category. Categories are usually the variables as labels, and then this is the variables as bins. So hopefully that helps clear up just a little bit on histograms and bar graphs.